Today we're going to be working on a little bit of Subaru suspension. Let's go. Take a moment to kind of talk about how I jack up my car. There was one time that I jacked up my car and I just went straight from sitting on the ground to the maximum height of the jacks, right? And what happens then is you're going to be tilting your car on such an angle that it might not be supported very well, and one of those jacks might actually come out under you. So my suggestion, jack up your car on one side to the height of the minimum setting of your jack stands, and then go to the other side and just jack it all the way up to the max here, and then come back over to the other side and then lift it up to the max on this side. This way, it's going to be a 3-step process, but it's a lot safer than tilting the car to the point where those jacks might fold underneath. Just teeter up and teeter back down. Now, my car is on Fortunato 500 coilovers, as you can see here in there. So I'm going to be modifying my suspension a little bit, and I'm going to set it up quote unquote the proper way now. And to do it properly, you're going to need something called helper springs, and I'm going to get into that today. Now I'm taking a look at this bushing here, and this is a 6-year-old bushing in Southern California, so it doesn't even see the salt that everyone else sees. And I can see that it's kind of already a little bit ripped right in that little corner right here, right? People are doing like lots of lifts. So when you flex your suspension all the way down, it's gonna put some stress on those bushings, okay? Now, what I'm trying to achieve here is have the wheel droop down a little bit lower with the suspension when it's unweighted. And therefore I can, when you take corners pretty fast and, one of the wheels gets unweighted, you lose grip, right? Because there's no more traction. But if you can have your suspension sag or droop down further, when you're going around those corners, you'll have those tires just touching. So you'll keep that grip, right? Now, with coilovers here, typically this is the maximum travel. Okay, this is a 7-inch spring. The wheel droops from here to here. That's your downward travel or your droop, right? And then when you compress upwards, that's called your compression, right? So the point is, after I do the suspension modification, I should see this center axle, where the center of the wheel is, it should come down maybe about an inch. We're going to be screwing this threaded down about 1 centimeter. So my final distance from the wheel arch to here, the center, is going to be, instead of 39, it's going to be 41. So that's 2 extra centimeters of droop. But what happens is the spring, when it's in here, there's not enough spring to push it all the way down. That's where the helper springs come in, okay? So while I'm here, I'm going to put some anti-seize, this copper anti-seize, in the threads here and on some of these threads here. So I don't really get like rain and salt and those things, but if you do have coilovers and you live in a place where it rains a lot, or if there's salt or dirt on the road, this is a good way to prep your coilover so that later on they're adjustable, right? We're gonna jack up underneath here. We're gonna push this arm all the way up until this gets fully compressed up there, right? Then we're gonna fit the wheel on this to see if it fits in the wheel well here. Oh, by the way, I've removed my sway bar end links just so that I have free motion here, right? And that's important because if those are connected, then you're not going to be able to attain your maximum droop. Okay, so I just want to make a sort of a point of what I'm doing here. You can see the coilover, and this part here is threaded in and it's locked, and the spring, there's preload on the spring. I think there's like a 5 or 10 millimeter preload on the spring, and that keeps the spring tight against the purchase. So when your damper and your wheel is completely unloaded, this spring, it's not rattling around. That's super important. So, I'm not looking for, crazy amounts of droop, because this is an Impreza. It's a road car. It's a street car. It's not an off-road vehicle, right? So I'm not looking for that crazy lift like some of the cross-track people are doing. But what I do want to do is just get a little bit more droop. when you mount curbs or mount driveways, sometimes, you know, on the diagonal, because I have stiff sway bars and this kind of not so droopy suspension, you know, one of those wheels is going to spin, right? Because it's lifted off the ground and elevated. So by adding that little extra half an inch, 1 inch, I should be able to mount those curbs with all 4 wheels on the ground and not have the traction control kick in. So, you know, it's really subtle, guys, I know. And for the price of those helper springs, which I think together with shipping was like around 300 and something, it's kind of, you know, do you guys need that half inch, 1 inch? I mean, you know, you guys decide, right? But for me, I enjoy suspension. It's one of my favorite things about cars. And, you know, I'm just trying to optimize some of my stuff and get that extra droop. Okay, so here's the complete spring put together. We've got the helper spring up here, which compresses under just a little bit of weight. And we got the main spring here that compresses under the full vehicle weight, only about, you know, this much, right? So the rest of it is meant for the full travel. This is meant to just take up that extra little bit of droop at the end. And we're going to install it back in the Impreza. See what happens. All right, so here's the front. And I've gone and added those helper springs. As you can see, they're not compressed because the weight of the car is not down. Now, I don't know if you guys can tell, but now that I have a little bit more droop, you can actually see a little bit of positive camber on that wheel. And that's because when the wheel comes down, there's actually kind of an arc that the wheel runs in, right? Before, it was limited to about level. Now it's going to come down just that slight bit. It's going to help when the car rolls. It's going to create like a nice contact patch. And I'm going to have that extra 2 centimeters of front travel. We're going to try to do the same thing with the rear. All right, friends, it's the Subaru up on jack stands yet again. We got a little bit of tilty angles going on today. We're just going to be working on the rear. So I've jacked up the car, chalked up the front, and I've put them on jack stands with supporting the diff carrier support. And the rear suspension on this car is really, really fun. It's pretty standard across most 2008 plus Subarus. The Outback, the Forester, the Legacy, the Crosstrek, the Impreza, and I think even some of the models of BRZs and Toyota FRSs use the same rear suspension. So there's a lot of interchangeability, at least the arms and some of the sway bar linkages. The coilovers and things like that for the BRZs are different, but if you guys are looking for suspension for a 2012 to 2016 Impreza or a 2013 to 2017 Crosstrek, first generation Crosstrek, then you can source a lot of the suspension components from 2008 plus WRXs. They have almost the same design. The coilovers are the same too. If you guys are in the 2017 plus Impreza or 2018 plus Crosstreks, I think some of the suspension has changed. So it's not to say that some of it hasn't carried over, but I'm pretty sure that with the global platform, they've changed up some of the parts and the positioning of the hard mount point. So keep that in mind when you're upgrading your suspension. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do while the suspension is still in the car is I'm going to loosen up these collars because they're really hard to loosen up when they're not on the car. So, and if anyone's ever wondering, how do you get those collars off? They're so tight and you got like so little leverage on these things, right? These tools come with a half-inch square in there so that you can apply it to a lever like this, and then you can do the nice torquey torques. All right, so if we were going to do a little bit of a measurement here, I've roughly estimated that this is about 38 centimeters from that wheel arch to the maximum droop with the suspension coilover installed. Now, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to maybe try to get this to 40. Yeah, guys, I know. Another 2 centimeters, right? What's that going to do? That's just going to push the wheel down 2 centimeters more before it lifts off the ground. So here is the rear coilover pulled out. It's a little bit smaller than the front. The spring is the same size, and the travel, I'm going to measure to see how much it is. But here's the stuff of tools that I need to use, minus a couple of wrenches. But, you know, you get the idea. You know, it's kind of a blessing to be able to work on your own car and just have the I guess, the confidence to do it, because at first when I started, I didn't know anything about taking apart a car, but over time, if you have the space for it, man, just get into it. It's worth it. It's a lot of fun, and you get to learn a lot. All right, so the point of this exercise is really just to find out what the maximum compression I can get without the wheel rubbing on the inside. So if I put my hand up in here, still some room that I can kind of slip my fingers in. That tells me that, I've reached almost the maximum. If I can, have about less than an inch up there, right? But that's good. Full wheel compression. And then now we want to see how much droop we can actually get. Last year, when I went to go buy a Christmas tree, there's this parking lot that went over a sidewalk, and then I went straight into dirt. And every time I crossed that threshold, the bottom of my car scrapes, right? And yeah, I deal with it once in a while, but I don't like it. I don't like the sound of scraping stuff under my car, right? But I also like good handling on the street. So that's why I'm not raising it like crazy high and I'm not dropping it crazy low. Again, if you drop it too low, your roll centers for the suspension geometry get changed. And if you raise your car too high, your suspension geometry, roll centers also are affected. So we want to keep it within the original design, maybe plus or minus that 1.5 inch, right? All right, at this point, I have jacked up the car from the differential just enough so that the right wheel here is lifted off the ground. Okay, I can confirm that by spinning the wheel just freely, right? You can maybe baby see the gap there. That's just enough, okay? And there's a clear shot here of the helper spring with the mainspring. So now I'm going to adjust my preload. Right, I'm gonna do it with you. So here's the upper collar, here's the lower collar. This one's already locked in at, remember we checked our height of the wheel arch to the hub. That's locked in now. Here is where I can just adjust till I get my proper ride height. That's just under 2 centimeters. So I'm gonna go up a couple more screws. And since it's a threaded collar and I put some anti-seize on here, it's really easy to spin just with my hand and a glove, right? And what do we have? 2? That's right. So I'm gonna lock this down. So now it's tightened. This is locked. There's 2 centimeters of gap here, 2 centimeters of gap on that side as well. This is the suspension. Love it. All right, so we went for a proper shakedown on the suspension, now elevated probably about 1/2 inch all around. And we also have the inclusion of our helper springs, which allows us to get an extra 20 millimeters of droop front and rear. The only binding, and I air quote binding part to this conversation is that we still have stiff sway bars, right? However, I found that, remember how I was talking about those driveway mountings on like the corners, like when you get kind of diagonal? Now, when I go over those same driveways, my suspension feels much more compliant. That's not to say that I don't have that roll stiffness that I used to. I still do because I have the sway bars, right? But because I can have more downward travel on my suspension, you get a little bit more of that ride plushness, the comfort, right? I even went to the Santa Anita parking lot. There's a racetrack near here. And there's a giant parking lot that's never used, right? Unless there's huge events. And so I saw some, an opening, and I just went in for, just to take a look around. I don't have any video, guys. I don't know if it's illegal or legal, but I just went for a spin around the parking lot, and I can tell the suspension is much more compliant. The rear end doesn't skate around like it would otherwise. So I'm very happy with these helper springs and this adjustment in droop. My car looks almost stock again, other than like the headlights, right? So it's kind of funny that I would go all the roundabout way of upgrading suspension to make it look almost identical to how it was stock. You guys know, you've seen this car under the front, under the rear, in the trunk. There's all types of stuff that makes this car a lot more fun to drive, and I really enjoy it now. It's very comfortable and it's very sporty still. So unfortunately, I don't have any video for you guys because I didn't have my camera. I was just like kind of in the moment. I'm like, should I set up my camera for everyone? I'm like, yeah, it's gonna maybe a security car would come by, and I'm like, forget it. I'm just gonna rip. And it was a lot of fun just going around that parking lot with like nothing. Like you could just send it. Anyway, I think about the tires these days because I know that now that my car feels more compliant, it feels less like I feel more confident in it, right? Because before I knew that if I hit a certain type of bump, it would crash a little bit, and I would, I'd have to like, tense up and hold the line. But now that the suspension is a little bit more compliant, it rides a little bit higher, and I can roll into the corner and feel all of the weight, on those tires. You want a little bit of roll, right? You don't want it to be ultra stiff. So like people going like 26 millimeter front sway bars, 24 millimeter sway bars. I mean, unless you're on the track and you have like good tuning for your suspension, that for the street is not going to be fun, right? So I think I've struck a pretty good balance with the 24, 22 right now. Tune your cars, guys. Make them feel nice so you're confident in most driving conditions, right? And then if you're going to be doing those events or like canyons or racing or any of those things, you can tighten up the suspension a little bit more. It's a little impressive with a good suspension. Loads of fun.